You're with Chris of World News from Tehran. Time now for the news review. Russia again warning about a missile crisis amid a standoff with Western powers over Ukraine. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov says that Moscow considers the threat of a new missile crisis as serious. The warning is made just after Russian President Vladimir Putin said that his country has different options in response to NATO's eastward expansion. The tension over Ukraine had been simmering as the U.S. and NATO accuse Russia of preparing to invade the country. Moscow blames NATO for the border tensions. Early this month, Russia said it may be forced to deploy intermediate-range nuclear missiles in Europe in response to what it sees as NATO's plans to do the same. Let me now invite a couple of guests and see what they think about this and get some insight. So John Steppeling, writer and political commentator, is joining us from Indre, Norway. Also, we'll have Marcus Papadopoulos, historian, political analyst, and author in London. Good to see you, Jeremy. Now, John, this saber rattling, if we can put it, has been going on for quite some time, sometimes toning down, sometimes, and this time this is a serious one. And I wonder what you can, if it is possible to predict what will be happening, because each side is threatening the other side and blaming each other, and then Moscow is saying that I cannot go any further back, this is my soil, and then you got to go back, and then what the story is. So what do you think things will be moving in which direction?
Putin made an interesting series of comments last week. And he pointed out that this is not thousands of miles from Russian national territory. This is adjacent to Russian territory. It is, in fact, thousands of miles away from U.S. territory. And he mentioned the U.S. bombing of Belgrade, the destruction of Yugoslavia. He mentioned the invasion of Iraq. He mentioned Syria. And pointed out what was the pretext for any of those actions by the U.S. He says they don't need a pretext, they do what they want. And this, of course, is quite true. And the U.S., with the help of Hillary Clinton and Victoria Nuland, put this Nazi regime in power in Kiev. Russia has something like 200 war crimes cases filed at the UN against this regime in Kiev. Nothing will happen with that, but there are rumors of chemical weapons being stockpiled by this regime and so forth. So it's a very unstable situation. But the U.S., I mean, one presumes that Jake Sullivan is the shot caller right now for U.S. foreign policy. Kamala Harris isn't. Biden is inching into senility. And so, Sullivan is a hardline interventionist, and that's a little worrying. But the U.S. has to know that that Russia is drawing a line here, and they can't, there's nowhere for them to retreat further. They have been extraordinarily patient, actually, and they're not going to tolerate too much more. And the U.S. is in no position to engage in a shooting war with Russia on their doorstep. It's ludicrous. They can't do it. They can't win it. And also, this takes place against the backdrop of the pandemic. The U.S. has not been able to reopen its economy. It's been a hyper-monopolization of retail. Small businesses are crushed. And so Western countries, a lot of EU countries, are suffering economically right now because of these lockdowns, and that's a whole story unto itself, of course. But so it seems like an awful lot of empty posturing, frankly, at this point.
I wonder if Marcus views it the same way, because Marcus, as John mentioned it, the U.S. Should not be able, given the situation at home, to stomach such a thing in another war. And we see what happened in Afghanistan after 20 years. So why are they doing this? Are they looking for a pretext to wage a war, or what?
Well, I implore people, wherever they reside in the world, to comprehend the gravity of the situation concerning the crisis in Ukraine, because as a result of the expansionist nature of NATO and the insatiable lust of NATO to see Ukraine admitted into its ranks, the national security of Russia is severely threatened. And as a result of that threat, Russia will take all measures necessary, all measures which it feels compelled to avert the threat of a Ukraine joining NATO. And as a result of that, it is very possible that a conventional war between the two superpowers, America and Russia, could break out. And a conventional war between the two superpowers would quickly escalate into a nuclear exchange between the two. And a nuclear exchange between Washington and Moscow would spell the end for mankind. Now, why is NATO, which America and Britain are the de facto leaders of, seeking to admit Ukraine into the West's military bloc? Well, to enclose Russia completely on its western border. Because in a scenario where Ukraine is in NATO, Russia would be encircled on its western border from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea by NATO member states. And a Ukraine in NATO would host numerous NATO, in particular American military installations. The American military shield in Eastern Europe, which currently is in Poland and in Romania, could very well be extended into Ukraine, which would pose an enormous threat to the Russian strategic nuclear deterrent. Furthermore, Ukraine in NATO would host NATO, again, American, especially American naval bases, which would challenge Russian naval supremacy in the Black Sea. So the situations surrounding the Ukraine crisis is severe, it is grave. And yes, comparisons can be made to the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, but I would also say that comparisons can be made to the year 1983, which was a year in which there could have been a war, including a nuclear war, between the United States and the Soviet Union. And I have to emphasize again, all of this tension, this very real risk of a war between the two superpowers is a result of America, NATO's lust for further power, and on this occasion, further power at Russia's expense.
Okay. Now, on that note, we come to the end of this news review. John Steppeling, writer and political commentator, to join me from Indroy, and Marcus Papadopoulos, historian, political analyst, and author from London, with their thoughts and contribution. Thank you for watching this edition of the News Review.